Welcome back to It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System. I'm Chris Stauffer. I think we're all concerned about screen time. That might be for those of us personally, but certainly when it comes to our children. Joining us to talk a little bit about screen time and our kids is Jeff Reiland, therapist at Gundersen Health System. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the kids, they're growing up with these things. It's the phone, it's the iPad, it's the regular computer, let alone the television. And screens are everywhere.
And video games.
And video games.
It is. They're a part of our lives. There's no way to get around that. And I don't think that they're all bad. I think it's if there's a take home, it's everything in moderation. It's just what is that amount? We're not saying that kids shouldn't have these things. We just want kids and parents to be aware of the downside of having too much of screen time. And that's, I think, as in science, we're just beginning to realize in the last 5-10 years that there is a downside to too much screen time. And I think we're trying to get the message out about how to use screen time in a wise way for family instead of parents, and this is a chronic thing I hear about with my parents, constantly fighting with their kids about getting off their devices, constantly arguing. And so it's become a source of frustration with families, a source of conflict with families. And in fact, kids will say things like, "I'm bored unless I'm plugged in." And that is an interesting element of all of this, because there's scientific evidence now that the reason they're bored is because screens are so exciting. There's so much going on that it's wiring their brain, literally rewiring their brain to think that anything that isn't that action-packed, that interesting, is boring.
That dopamine is what you're talking about.
That's exactly it. It's that neurochemical. They get that kick by being plugged in. And so when they don't have that device or that thing, there's nothing else that's as interesting. And the problem with that, of course, is kids are more sedentary. Kids are spending less time socially with one another. They're not getting those really important elements. And you think, just spend time with your friends, just play. That's the work of childhood. That's how they develop social skills.
There's a lot of people that are listening to this right now going, "Oh, that's us. Oh, that's us." But there's a lot of parents, a lot of grandparents who are just backing away from it, saying, "I give up. It's too hard to get young people off that video game," for example.
Right.
What do you tell them?
Well, I would rather start with a 3-year-old than a 13-year-old. I would say that. And so for those parents who have younger children, start now, not wait until it's a problem. But if you have really clear rules and expectations in a family, you're going to be more successful if you stick with those rules, but you also find things to replace it with. Because when you say just get off of something or stop doing that, but you don't tell kids what to do or guide them what to do, given that they haven't had much practice at using those creative parts of their mind, I think they need a little bit of hand-holding. They need a little bit of direction. And so it would be appropriate to say, these are the things we're going to do before we get plugged in. These are our family activities. These are the things, the chores, the homework, whatever it is. These happen before you have screen time. I liken it to dessert versus the main meal. We don't let kids have ice cream before they have dinner. It's just one of those, that's the thing you have after you've had the main meal. And think about the work of the day for children is running and jumping and playing and doing their homework and doing their chores and spending time with the family and just doing the important stuff that helps to shape their thinking and problem-solving skills, their creativity, their expressive language, their emotional regulation. All of that stuff happens when they're interacting with their family members or their friends, and then they can have a little bit of dessert and something toward the end of the day that they've earned. So parents don't never have to take screen time away. They say, you earn this when you've done the work of the day. And if you didn't do the work today, that's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. And if you get the work done, we'll get that screen time.
We're talking with Jeff Reiland, therapist, Gundersen Health System, about screen time and maybe even trying to put limits on it, which opens up the question, how much screen time is appropriate for a 3-year-old or a 13, 14, 15-year-old?
Yeah, that's a tough question. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that a number of organizations, the American Academy of Pediatrics in particular, came up with pretty clear guidelines a couple of decades ago, in fact, now, that they were saying 1 to 2 hours a day. Now, they backed off of that a little bit in terms of it being a hard number because it's hard to, exactly 2 hours in, things automatically shut off. I think that it needs to be done in reason. My bias in a school day, if you're looking at, I want my child to have quality interaction with family members. I want them to get their homework done. I want them to do their chores. And once they get home from school and I get home from work, we probably have maybe 3 hours of the whole day left. And if they're not on screens before school, that doesn't. Why would I want them on the screen for 3 hours? I mean, that's. I get no time with my child. So I think that, if kids have a limited amount during the school days, more time on the weekends, perhaps. If kids, kids can get rigid and fixed on, I get my hour, I get my 2 hours. They won't want to go to family functions if they would get cheated out of their time. So I just suggest to parents that they have a screen time bank account, that if they don't get to use it because they're watching their sister play basketball or they're going to their siblings' concert, that maybe they could stockpile it for that sub-zero weather day when they're stuck at home and there's nothing else to do. That would be okay. Or if they want to buy something that's going to cost a little more than the family wanted, maybe they could figure out how to cash some of those hours in that they've been taken care of. So that way kids aren't having it taken away from them, but rather they're earning it. I think that range, again, 1 to 2 hours is a good amount of time if kids have other options that are also obvious to them.
Okay, 1 to 2 hours seems like a very little amount of time for a 13-year-old teenager.
I get that. But going for bike rides, going sledding, hanging out with friends, reading, other activities that can really build relationship skills. I also think that sometimes in that 2-hour limit, sometimes kids will say, I connect with my friends because we game online, we do things together. And I get that. That's why I think it's not so much how much time they're spending, it's what they're missing. And if they can combine it, if they can do social interaction with screens, with friends on occasion, not every day for 4 hours, but if they're doing those things and they're also getting exercise, getting their chores, their homework is going well, they're getting along with other family members, they're golden. That should not be a problem. I think the better question is, am I getting enough time, is what am I not getting? And that's where I think parents can focus.
Again, we're talking with Jeff Reiland, therapist, Gundersen Health System, about screen time. What are your conversations like with young people about screen time? Because I know a lot of times it's the parents that are frustrated. But the kids, I think sometimes, or the young people, are frustrated too, because they're saying, well, this is today. This is our world today. What kind of conversations are you having in your office with those young people?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. I think if kids don't know anything else, then imagining not having as much screen time is going to be kind of frightening. On the other hand, kids that maybe weren't all that invested in screen time, they're really interested in their hobbies, they're really interested in their sports, they're really interested in their friendship relationships and doing things outdoors. It's an easy thing to walk away from. And I've seen many children, or teenagers, who, when they start developing those other interests, those screens become less important. They become less of a fixed part of their lives because they see that they have other things they can do. I've had kids say, I don't want that anymore because I like what we're doing better. I like that I'm not irritable and cranky. I like that I'm not obsessing about my device all the time. I like that I'm getting along with my family members and that they're not nagging me. My parents aren't nagging me about my grades. They see the connection. Many of them see the connection between getting too plugged in and the consequence of that, and how much better life is when they're not so invested in that.
And I'm sure you've also heard the teenagers that are out there saying, well, I'm not playing video games, I'm just on my phone. And that's not necessarily what you're looking to.
No, it's just trading horses. They're all the same. And, I think it's a matter of time. Last year, in 2018, the World Health Organization identified excessive video gaming as a behavioral addiction like gambling, so it falls into that category. And a lot of people were surprised by that, and we've seen it coming for a long time now. But the question, I think, the bigger question is, well, why just video games? Why not social media, cell phones? Why not computers? Why not television? And I think it's a matter of time before we're saying, boy, all of those devices probably have addictive qualities where kids, they obsess about them. They can't seem to control their amount of time. It's getting in the way of their relationships or their academics. It's starting to affect their moods. That's what makes it an addictive behavior. And I think it's just a matter of time before those other screen devices become part of that category.
Again, we're talking with Jeff Reiland, therapist at Gundersen Health System, about screen time. When we come back, we're going to talk more about the addictive behavior and how to maybe recognize that in someone in your house. That's next, and It's Personal. It's Personal is brought to you by Gundersen Health System. Welcome back to It's Personal, brought to you by Gundersen Health System. Really getting an education here from Jeff Reiland, therapist at Gundersen Health System, about screen time. Recently, you're just talking about addiction. What are some of the behaviors that parents or grandparents need to know or need to recognize in, I want to focus on young people, but it might be adults because, let's face it, video games have been around a long time. It might be a spouse.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the challenges, one of the surprises perhaps that I've had in my world, that when I'm working with kids, they'll say things like, well, my mom or my dad, they're always on their phone, they're always on their computer, they're always on their video game. And so I think it's not just specific to kids, and certainly there have been many, sometimes sad stories about parents who were so plugged into their device that they forgot to parent their child, or they just got lost for a while. And kids are being raised by their devices because parents are on their own, and that's a challenge. It's not just our young people. The difference, I would say, is that a young child's developing brain is far more vulnerable to being connected to a screen because it's still growing. And so when children at young ages develop these exposures to screens for a longer period of time, it has a more profound impact than if, for example, a grandparent starts getting plugged in at an older age, because their brain isn't growing in the same way at the same rate. So it's that window of time that's really critical, and why the American Academy of Pediatrics had limits on screens for children but not adults, because they're much more vulnerable at that young age.
When should a phone or a screen be introduced to a child?
Oh, that's a really political question. I can't give you a good answer for that, because many parents would say, look, it's a safety feature. I want my child to call me when they get off the bus. I want to know these things. I want them, they might have a locator on the phone so that the parent can know where their child is. So I can't say that there's a good time. I think kids can have that communication with limits. When kids in second grade have an unlimited data plan with a smartphone, and they're on all night long, and they use it as their alarm clock, and they're playing games on their phone, that's a problem. And so we want kids to be able to regulate it. And it's pretty clear that even teenagers, and probably some adults, have a hard time not regulating their device. So I think middle school is a common age when kids get their first smartphone. Maybe at younger ages, kids can have phones that have more limits, and I know there are apps that can limit phone use and the kinds of things that kids can go on to. I think many kids are more savvy or sophisticated with technology than their parents are, and so parents are often relying on their kids to help them to even download the apps to help regulate the screen time for children.
Let's face it, kids need more sleep, too. Young people certainly can sleep the day away unless they're on their phones, unless they're up at night. And I know you've told stories of young people who are on their phones all night long,
right,
and not getting that REM sleep, if you will.
Right. Children, depending on the age, need between 8 and 10, 12 hours of sleep. And when they're getting 4 or 5, and the reason they're getting 4 or 5 is because they are all jazzed up because they're playing video games just before bedtime, or it cut into their sleep time, or they use their phone as an alarm clock, but it's getting messages all night long, or notifications all night long, and they're texting or Snapchatting or some other communication with their friend group all night long. They're not getting the sleep they need. And that'll look like in the morning, they're tired, they're crabby, they're having a hard time getting out of bed, they might be falling asleep in school, they're certainly irritable the rest of the afternoon. They might make that mistake of taking a long nap at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they now are tired at 10 o'clock at night. And so they're up later, and when they're up, they're bored, and of course the natural thing to do is pull out your phone. One of the guidelines we recommend is that kids not use their cell phone as an alarm clock. There are less expensive plug-in devices that they can use. They could have 2 tones. One could just play music to wake them up slowly at 7 or whatever they get up. And the second one could be the no-nonsense 15 minutes later beeping sound, and then the parents could be the third alarm. But when it's the phone that's the alarm, it's too easy to use it for other purposes. And I think that's something that parents can maybe revisit, especially if kids don't have it. I wouldn't start that. I'd make the phone something that gets charged up in the parents' bedroom or in the kitchen or some common area. That's not where kids are sleeping.
When kids are using an excessive amount of screen time, how do you handle that? How do you notice it?
I think parents notice it. First, I think I want to say that what happens is that kids are in their rooms a lot. They're quiet, and that's not always a bad thing. Parents like it when it's quiet, but what they start to notice is their child is like more isolated. And so a sign of depression and a sign of excessive screen time is isolation. They're just more withdrawn. They're less interested in participating in family activities. They just want to be on their device. They may even wind up not going to school. They would just rather stay home. And of course, when they're home, if they're unsupervised, especially as teenagers, because parents may not just stay home from work if their child is sick, they might be on their device. And so it starts to become around the clock kind of an activity. If parents are noticing their child has no other interests besides something that's related to a screen, if they see a change in their quality of friendships, a lack of motivation in doing anything else, or if their screens aren't available, a preoccupation with them, then I think we're looking at a more serious problem. Those are the elements of an addictive process going on.
Interesting. And at what point do they turn to a therapist?
Well, it's better to prevent this problem, and it's an easy thing to prevent if parents are much more involved in setting clear standards, following those guidelines themselves, and monitoring that, and making sure they have healthy family activities and alternatives, and that their kids are involved in other things besides devices. Again, a little bit goes a long way. If the child is having problems, if they're struggling in school, if the parent's concerned about their quality of friendships and relationships, if they seem withdrawn and maybe even talking about self-harm, not wanting to live anymore, if their motivations have changed, those are important things to want to assess and figure out what's going on. Sometimes it's the screen time. Sometimes it is also a depressive disorder that's developing. It's not always one thing.
We could talk about this all day long, couldn't we? Yeah, this
Yes,
is a growing topic, that's for sure. And certainly more and more information coming out each and every day in regards to studies about excessive screen time with our young folks.
Yeah, I think the other piece that that would come back and talk more about is how sometimes screens are an escape for many kids who socially don't feel like they fit in, who maybe they've been bullied or maybe they feel anxious in the school environment. But boy, when they're on their screen, they're in control, they're successful, they can win, they can play well, they understand, they feel competent, and that again helps reinforce that this is where I belong, because they haven't had as much success in the real world.
They get likes, they get friend requests, they get,
Right.
interesting. And we will save that for a different day. Jeff Reiland, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Very good information. And as always, if you like more information about this topic, you can certainly check out the Gundersen Health System website. That's gundersenhealth.org. Jeff, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
That's going to wrap it up for this edition of It's Personal. It's Personal is brought to you by Gundersen Health System.